If you were making these guards mad, they would throw water on you and get you wet and put you in cells where they controlled the doors. And they would put you in a cell at night or in the wintertime wet and open the windows up, and they would freeze you. To the point of critical condition hypothermia is a form of punishment. It was a lot of abuse there in that facility.
The Blue Line Voice. Blood, sand, and smoke.
Welcome to the Blue Line Voice, Blood, Sand, and Smoke podcast. I'm your host, Josh Weddell. Today we have a special guest. He has 40 years of law enforcement experience going across law enforcement and in the private sector. He has 16 years in law enforcement in multiple jurisdictions. He started as a game warden with the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. He was a deputy sheriff, a corrections officer, narcotics, and vice investigator across Virginia. He's an expert witness for 9 judges in Virginia, West Virginia, and Tennessee. Instructor at 3 Virginia law enforcement academies. He has multiple commendations and Lynchburg's Honorable Service Award. He is a founder, CEO of Complete Surveillance and Investigative Services. He serves in individuals, law firms, Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 clients. He is the private investigator who broke open the documents in the Austin Lee Edwards case, which is the catfish cop, and also the Charles Givens case. Without further ado, I want to introduce Jeff Pike. Jeff, it's great to have you on the show, man.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it very much.
So we're going to get digging right into it. And the most important question is, what got you into law enforcement? And take as long as you want and tell us about it.
No, my father cycled out of Vietnam, and I was actually born in 1964 at Keesler Air Force Base when he cycled out of Vietnam. He had been overseas, and when he got out within 6 months, so basically when I was 6 months old, he began his career in law enforcement. And so my brother was born 13 months after I was. So we grew up in a family where our father was a police officer. Early on, it was probably what most cops' kids back in the day did. I'm not so sure about today, but when I was young, we would go to the police station. We might sit in his car. He was a motor officer at one point. My mom would say, "It's about time for your dad to get home." And we would wait at the end of the driveway. He'd throw me on the back of the bike and my brother up on the gas tank and drive us from the road to the garage. Little things like that exposed. But then in 1979, he became sheriff, elected as sheriff. And at that time, my brother and I were 13, 14-year-old kids. And we really got exposed to law enforcement then to a degree that would not be replicated today. And it's like I said to you earlier, it was kind of like the Andy Griffith show on steroids. When we got out of school, we would go to the sheriff's office or go to the jail. We would hang out. We would go on patrol. We were on traffic stops. We were doing shakedowns in the jail. We were dispatching. A lot of things that would never be allowed today. And it was just sort of our family business. And so I don't know if it's just in our DNA for my family, or obviously that exposure when you're very young, just like any other family that may have a family of mechanics or a family of plumbers or a family of the car dealership owner or insurance guy. I think it was, I remember other cops, when I was real little, 8, 7, 8 years old, would get a kick out of it. They go, "What are you and your brother going to be when you get big? We're going to be policemen. We're going to be policemen." And so we just naturally, that's what we wanted to do.
And your dad ended up becoming U.S. Marshal, am I correct?
Correct. After his career as sheriff, he was appointed or nominated and then appointed under President Bush. He was one in 93 head United States Marshals, and his area was the Western District of Virginia. And he served 2 terms President Bush and 1 term President Obama.
So your dad had a very, very lengthy law enforcement career.
Yeah. And he was a very unusual guy in that he was extremely hands-on. He was not a office guy all the time. He was always involved in getting into something, as I call it. I remember in school, I was in a class and they would have the speakers on the wall, and Mr. Carney, the principal, got on the speaker and said to the teacher, "Hey, send Jeff Pike to the office." And me and my brother were not ones to get in trouble at all. I say this all the time, the only person before I became a policeman that I'd ever been in a fight with was my brother. And we just didn't get in trouble. So I go to the principal's office, and that's my brother. And he goes, "What'd you do?" And I said, "I didn't do anything." So we go into the principal's office, and Mr. Carney's smoking a pipe, and he said, "You Pike boys, sit your ass down. Your daddy's done been in a shootout down the road. He's done killed a man. I know how rumors are at this school." And we're like, "Wow, what happened? What happened?" He said, "It's okay. Your daddy's done," he kept saying, "Your daddy's done killed a man." And we're like, "Can we get out of school? We want to go to the sheriff's office." And he's like, "No, you're going to go back to class." And we did. And when we got out, we went down there. And my father, had been a call for a woman that was seen with this suspicious gentleman, an elderly lady. And what they didn't know was this gentleman had committed a robbery in Baltimore, Maryland, and he had shot a cop and took his gun away from him. And when they got the call for this elderly lady, what he had done was taken her from her home and taken her to the pharmacy to get some prescriptions, or try to get some prescriptions. He was on pills. So just so happened there was a gentleman that was interested in applying for the sheriff's office, never been on a ride long, never been in law enforcement. And my dad says, "Hey, come and go with me. I'm going to go out here. They're looking for this lady." And so this complete new guy is interested in being a police officer is in the front seat. They pull the little lady's car over. And when this guy gets out, he had not, and I'm not a big gun person. I mean, I've got guns and whatnot. A Smith & Wesson cylinder rotates opposite of a Colt. And whatever he had, he'd used one round to shoot the policeman, and he lined the cylinder up wrong. And he pulled the gun out and stuck it up there was another deputy there, stuck it up to his head and said, "Die, you son of a bitch." And it clicked on the empty cylinder. Yeah. So, and it was big headlines here, but I think that was very indicative of my dad's career, even as a marshal. I would go visit him. His office was in Roanoke, Virginia, and the deputy marshals would come up to me and go, "Jeff, your dad's out with us on raids. Your dad's pulling people over. Your dad, is involved in all these things." And he said, they were like, "We've never had that. Most of these marshals are just figureheads and you never even see them." And they're like, "We're worried we're going to get our marshal killed because your dad insists on going with us on tactical entries." And I said, "Well, he's just old school. He believed that if you were the sheriff or the marshal, you should be, he was the guy that would kick the door in. He was the guy that was dragging the person out." And it was very unusual for that era, in that most of these people, once they got to that position, merely stayed in the office, drank coffee, went to lunch, was at home by 3 o'clock. But he was pulling over cars and patrolling and doing a lot of things that, you could call my dad. Our phone number was in the phone book. Good luck calling, and it would be serious things. And my dad would get up 1, 2, 3 in the morning and go to them. And, that's unheard of now. It's unheard of.
It is. You don't see that much nowadays.
No.
So you follow in your dad's footsteps, and the first place and correct me if I'm wrong, but the first place you land is with the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries as a game warden.
Yeah, my first full-time law enforcement job was as a game warden. And my brother, when he got out of the Army, within 6 months, he was hired as a game warden, and he had been on for probably 3 or 4 years. And in Virginia, you have to be certified to the Department of Criminal Justice Services. And the competition was so tough to get hired anywhere. These small town departments, nobody ever left. The big agencies, it was just mass of people that would put in for the jobs. So, you would take whatever. Game warden was not my first choice. However, in the back of my mind, I knew that I could get certified and I could get that step ahead and then parlay that into wherever I wanted to go in my career. So, and it was tough. Like I said, there were 4,000 applicants for 12 jobs. The academy was the standard police academy. I think it was 28 weeks, general law enforcement. And then we went through another, I think it was 6 weeks of like more specialized stuff like operation of boats, boating laws, boating instructor, hunting and hunter safety instructor, things, ATV operation. They had different, more specialized things that we would do in those other weeks. And, but then oddly enough, I was assigned to Fairfax, Arlington, and Alexandria, the most populous counties in Virginia. Well over 1 million people. It's like if you'd sent somebody to, well, it was basically the suburb of Washington, D.C. And it was shocking. Number one, I had to go. It was about 300 miles from where I live now. And, it was a very urban metro area. The only aspects that were similar to what a game warden would do, they had the Potomac River, Occoquan River. So you had a lot of boating work in the summertime months. But it was shocking too. There were hunting incidents, even though it was in the city, of people shooting deer illegally. You couldn't even shoot a gun. It's so populous, it was illegal to shoot a firearm in those areas. But you had different cultures that lived there. You had construction workers from West Virginia or my area that would move there. And so these deer were not hunted. And so there were deer roaming in the cemetery or in the gas line or in the industrial park that somebody was, sneaking in and trying to get one, or, so it was. And then two, I didn't have to go on many calls. So, I met and worked around state troopers, the county police. So I did, and the game commission did not like it. I would get involved in a lot of what we would say is general law enforcement events just because I was there. You're just there, and a block away there's a robbery. I caught armed robber the first week I was there that robbed a 7-Eleven. Fights, they have parks, and so we would be patrolling these areas that necessarily wouldn't be patrolled by the cops so much. And you learned really quick, those were havens for things to go on, and, drug use, drinking, fighting, DUIs. I used to arrest a lot of DUIs as a game warden just because you're out and about and you just, you get behind a car and it's what it is. And I was one not to, pull somebody over and then call the trooper to do it. If I pulled it over, I dealt with it. And as you go through your law enforcement career, you'll learn that some people do that. And sometimes that's not met well with a very good response because, you know, I don't want somebody calling me to do their job for them. That's the way I looked at it. And I didn't want to call somebody. Now, if you came and I had a DUI arrested and I'm waiting on the tow truck and I may say, hey, guy, can you help me out? The tow truck's going to be here in 15 minutes. Can I go ahead and cut loose and go to the jail? And I would do the same for them too. So it was very interesting. That was the first area they sent me to. And then after that, I was sent down to Henry County, Virginia, Henry County, Franklin County, Patrick County, which was a much normal rural area, other than they had a couple of big lakes. They had Philpott Lake and Smith Mountain Lake, which dominated your time during the spring and summer doing boat patrol.
So going back just a little bit, so you did the state of Virginia, the police academy is basically the same for the game warden side and the municipal side.
Sure.
Right. So that set the foundation for you to move forth in your law enforcement career when you decided to depart the game warden side. Am I correct?
Yeah. I was already certified. I was certified as a police officer. So nobody had to put me through an academy, which is costly. Today's time, if somebody is certified, it can be good. They have an advantage. However, a lot of times the people who are certified and they may come to you, they may have had problems somewhere else. And so I think some departments will overlook issues with the officer because they're certified. We don't have to put them through academy. They're ready to go. They usually put you through some FTO, field training, or agency specific policy. Most of the times when I went places, I'd done so much that they would waive that for me. Of course, I was not one to get in trouble. I knew what I was doing. It sounds arrogant. And the people that knew me knew, if we hired Jeff, he knows what he's doing. And, the main things I needed to know was what box to put the report in, or what's your, normal procedure to process the paperwork, or where's the evidence and who's in charge of that. Those, kind of minor details that are kind of unique to every department.
Was it shocking to you when you made that transfer from the being a game warden over to just regular police work, not having to deal with the wildlife side? Was it any of that shocking to you, or did it come natural because you were already assisting those agencies while you were a game warden?
Yeah, it was very natural, I think. I think it was more in line with what I was interested in doing when I went to work. And believe it or not, I still did game violations as a regular police officer. I didn't bother to call the game warden. I kind of flipped it around. So in doing my regular police work, and then, some other police would kind of at first make fun of it. And then they'd realize, wow, Jeff, you're getting dope along with this game stop, or that allowed you to further your investigation that led to a convicted felon with a gun or whatever. And then the kind of quirky thing is that game violations are listed as criminal offenses. So in your stats, you had a criminal offense. And people were like, wow, Jeff's got a bunch more criminal. I said, well, a lot of them are game related. But it was very easy. I liked it. I liked more of that flow. But I didn't, from game warden, after I finished up game warden, I went directly into working undercover narcotics for an agency. And so I think that was more of the learning curve, even though I'd been exposed to some of that. That was more of and it's things you can't teach, to work undercover. Yeah, they sent us to undercover narcotics school and narcotics investigator school. They were like 1 week each. But to learn how to look terrible, to learn mannerisms and the drug culture and how to blend in and how to be successful in that. It's kind of trial by error. And then I did a lot of things, when I started doing that, that I learned that shit, flashing too much money or being too eager, pushing the person a little bit as far as rushing the time it takes to do it right. But knock on wood, I was lucky and never had any problems early on when I think I was really learning how to do that. The main thing that saved me is, I've always been the guy that has to put on a uniform to look like a cop. If I put on a uniform, I look professional and I look like a cop. Out of uniform, and especially if my hair's long and beards and, all this stuff that you start looking like and how you act. I think my look was so unlike a policeman that it helped me a lot.
What you mentioned that you went direct when you came out of the game warden, you went into undercover doing narcotics, which a lot of officers, it takes some time to get into that role. So you were able to get into it quite quickly.
Yes. And see, and unlike a lot of there's different levels of working as a narcotics investigator. There's the guys that are, they're mainly working informants and using informants to get search warrants. The stuff I did was, I had the shitty looking car. I had the look, I went into the bars or I went into the areas, and I did it on my own. Over my career, have I worked with informants, but not to the level I think that a lot of narcotics officers do. And I preferred it that way. And I preferred to have, one or just two people know that I existed, because I had worked cases during that early period where my narcotics handler was corrupt. He was stealing drugs and he was having sex with informants. And later on got put in prison for it. At the time, I didn't know it. And, in one of his cases, he wanted me to go to a location. It was a trailer and they did tattoos occasionally. And I went down and was able to buy from them. And the next day they ended up killing two people, or killing one and shot another one. But the long story of it is, I was dealing with people that had the potential to kill you. And my handler was as corrupt can be. And, I consider myself very lucky then. I had another handler that was, there's different levels of corruption when you get narcotics. A lot of times it's these guys that are hooking up or having sex with informants or people that's gotten in trouble. And, I worked with another guy that used his position for sexual favors. And, I had a vehicle that we used to have inspection stickers and a county sticker, and that was required on your vehicle. And I can't remember if I had a truck or a car. It didn't have a county sticker. So I knew the sheriff in Northern Virginia where I'd worked up there. And I said, "Hey, can you send me a county sticker? Because I don't want to ride around without the sticker, because blah, blah, blah." Anyway, this guy raised hell about it. "I can't believe you put a sticker on your car." And he's just raising hell about it. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. The reaction I'm getting for this, instead of saying, "Oh, wow, Jeff, that's a cool idea. Your story, you're from this other place and there's your sticker." What I found out later on is he would tell people, if you see the guy with the car without the county sticker on it, he's the narc. And that's why he was upset. And he didn't give a shit about me. He was more interested in hooking up with some female informant. And, that kind of shit can get you killed. I mean, it can get you, you show up and, somebody freaks out and says, "Hey, you don't have a county sticker. And I hear you're the guy," or whatever. Some of these people will kill you. I mean, they'll kill you
without hesitation either.
Absolutely. I mean, I dealt with people that were convicted murderers. That one case, their name was John and Stella. I can't remember their last name. They literally, I went in and bought drugs from them, and they shot 2 people the next day, on the street. Sometimes I think the street buys are probably more, people go, well, and I've dealt with cartel, gang, motorcycle gang people, a whole variance of folks. But I think probably the most dangerous is the street buys because you don't know who's feuding and fighting on the street. You don't know what guy is lying about what he's got. And he knows I show up with money. I think probably statistically, those are the worst compared to the more organized people, that I would go in a house or, they had a stable location. The guy on the corner, I think, was probably the most risky. I mean, it's all risky, but I think that's probably the more riskier thing you can do.
Were you ever put into a situation where there was a pucker factor or no shit moment? Like, I got to get out of here.
God, yeah. I mean, I got robbed one time. I remember I went to a house one time and they said, Jeff, you got to go in the basement. They got it in the basement. And I go in this basement, and there's like 6 guys. They got a kilo and they're processing it for crack and packaging it. And I'll never forget, they had this big wooden door that was thick, and they had like a 2x4 with a big screw they'd put through it so you could slide it, and they slid that across. And of course, I was buying then, I went there by myself. I didn't, there's no, I did a lot, you hear a lot of these guys will get on here talking, and they got cover teams, and, they allow me to freelance because, I did certain things. I got drug tested all the time. I didn't screw these girls working. They knew I was pretty squared away. And so, I did a lot of things that, I recorded it myself, and it allowed me to spend a lot of time, especially in bars. The first couple times they'd send somebody out, and I would be in a bar like 3 or 4 hours. And they were like, no, Jeff, that the people covering you were losing their minds because all you hear is garbled music and talking. And then they would say, if you feel like you need us, you need us. If not, you make the cases. And I would do package the evidence, write the report. Just one person would come and get it from me. And I just didn't have the teams. Now, later on, when they would do, I would set people up for a big bust at the end when they were finished with me doing like what I call very undercover work, and take, people with me to raid the house or do a search warrant. But a lot of it, I did by myself. And, I think you always have adrenaline. I wouldn't say that I ever was like scared out of my mind, but you do have adrenaline, and it's hard to deal with that too, because you got to keep that under control, because you don't want somebody to see you being nervous for some unknown reason, beyond reason. But I had done it so much, it was just like, okay. But I always said, I'm not super religious, but I'd always say, Lord, help me be successful and safe. And that's what I'd say before I'd go do it. And that was kind of my like little routine. I would say that to myself, and then I would go do it. I mean, I would go do it.
I see this I'm going to throw this question at you, like up here in New York, upstate and whatnot. If you get a narcotics case that's going to explode, it's going to go big, right? It's cartel level. Is there a point during your narcotics work you get a case that you're working where you have to pull in the DEA or FBI or ATF?
A lot of times they would have the task force going. So they would have somebody from ATF or DEA on it. If you got a major load, like, right over my shoulder, there's a traffic stop with 137 kilos.
Mhm.
And I'm a 70-year-old grandma mule. And of course, we called the DEA because she was going to deliver that to Boston. And they took her and the load there. I worked a case where I got a guy, and then I was actually sworn in with the DEA under the RICO Act. And we went to San Diego to further that investigation. So at times you did, but not that often. You know, I caught some bank robbers one time. I think that's the only time I've ever dealt with the FBI. You know, 2 FBI guys came down and got my report, and, you know, they processed it federally. And I don't know that I've ever seen an FBI. Now, ATF, I worked with, you know, Jennifer Clark, that has been on some podcasts. I worked with Jennifer quite a bit. And the ATF was much more active, it seemed like, in the field than anybody else you would see.
So, one topic I want to hit on is I believe you and I both come from, we did some rural suburban work, right, in law enforcement.
Correct.
And there's such a misconception because, you know, and this is not a knock on law enforcement at all, but, you know, if you're a city cop in a big metropolitan area, you get a call, the chances of having backup is going to be pretty quick, you know,
Correct.
in a big metropolitan area. When you're out in that rural area, you go to that domestic and it's a violent domestic or a violent fight, and you're the only car going, and you know, you're trying to have in your head when you're going to that call, where's my backup and how far away they are. Your mouth becomes, my friend calls it the gift of gab.
Sure.
Because I'm sure you already know this. You get to that call, and the last thing you want to do is start rolling around with somebody by yourself, or a family of that's totally intoxicated and they're all fighting each other and you're the only one there. So it's almost an art, isn't it, of trying to get that scene under control and wait for your backup before you start to escalate things.
Well, and I think too, again, it depends on how much you do that. You know, when I worked in the more rural areas, you know, I've worked 400 square miles and I was the only cop working for 2 or 3 hours. And there's 2 trains of thought here too. And, you know I catch shit sometimes because I tell the truth. You know, some cops that do that, they're going to be at the sheriff's office. They're going to be totally reactive. They're not going to pull a car over. They're not going to be out patrolling and looking. They're going to be kind of hiding and pretty laid back. I don't say I was on any kind of suicide mission or whatever. I didn't let that deter me. You know, I fought 2 or 3 people at the same time. I didn't get in a lot of fights. You know, I've been in some really bad fights. And some really, you know, I've been shot at 20 some times. I've had 3 or 4 people try to stab me. You know, I pushed it compared to, I think, what happens today. Maybe I was lucky. I think if you showed fear when you're dealing with people, that will get you. I think another thing is, if you're in a rural area and you've worked there and you have a reputation of being fair, you're not the asshole. You know, even the people I'd take to jail, if they want to smoke a cigarette before they they're hooked up, I like their cigarette. If their girlfriend wanted to give them a kiss, you know, if I saw them out and about, you know, hey, you doing okay? You know, so then when you would go on those calls, I think they knew who you were, they respected you. And, you know, and I've never been a heavy, you know, I'm 6'5". In my heyday as a cop, I was probably working patrol, maybe 215. I've always been kind of tall, more of an athletic runner build. And I think there's a lot of factors, the way you communicate with people, but I didn't let that deter me from pulling over. If I saw something and, you know, if I thought something was going on, I would deal with it. But, you know, there's been times that if I was lucky, it may be 30, 45 minutes before somebody even got to you. You know, and I think I've seen that more noticeably if you're in a vehicle pursuit. I've been in vehicle pursuits where I've chased somebody, God, 25, 30 miles before the first cop even got close. I mean, you're literally all over the place. And, you know, and I've had instances where people from other counties would hear it, and then somebody from another county got to me quicker than the people in my own county. Just geographically, I think a lot of the city cops, you know, and it was routine. You were dispatched to a call and you were the only one dispatched to it. in the city, every time I worked in the big cities, whoever got the call primary, whatever my number, and I've had a million numbers over the radio for the years, car 123, you go into the call, and the next words I'll dispatch is car 256, and they're sending them as your backup. Or people just work together and somebody would chime in and go, "Hey, I'm closer than that. I'll take it." You're in these rural counties and it's midnight shift or somebody's on vacation or whatever, you better know how to handle it. And, but I didn't really, again, I'd been around it so much, I never went to, to work scared. I've been around cops that were scared. I would work around cops that they could be really close to a fight call or shots fired call, and they're going to be the last ones to get there. And they had that reputation of being the last ones to go on a call. And that's fine. But I handled my call and I didn't think about being by myself.
You brought up a really good point just a little while ago about knowing the people where you worked, right?
Correct.
And you probably had the frequent flyers and you knew your clients, right? So, but it didn't mean you needed to be an asshole to them.
No.
Like, and right, like, so you respected people the way you wanted to be respected. So if you're driving down the road and you see that guy that you normally deal with or the gal that you deal with a lot, and you pull up on the shoulder road, you have a conversation with them, you're building that rapport. You're building that connection with them. So, because you know in the back of your head that there's good chance that you're going to wind up dealing with them, sometime down the road, or if you already hadn't.
Sure.
But you want to keep that rapport with them, so when you go to that call that they're involved in, that things can probably go a little bit smoother than they normally would.
Well, and I had worked around what I call asshole cops. I didn't want to be the asshole cop. When I grew up, me and my brother, our very naive perception of police was, the policeman's your friend. And, when you're lost, you can go to the policeman and ask him to get home or whatever. But, when I worked, I would shake somebody's hand. I've seen the cops that won't shake somebody's hand. I've seen the cops that the guy wants to smoke a cigarette before he goes to jail and he's hooked up and he hasn't been a problem. Let him smoke a cigarette. I don't give a shit. And the other cops go, "No, the hell with that guy." Or, "Can I kiss my wife or girlfriend before I go to jail?" And roll the window down. Let them get a kiss. Who cares? They remember that stuff. I remember one time going to a domestic call and the husband there'd been a fight, and this family was very notorious. They were not only drug dealers, but they had domestics. And I went to the house and the husband and wife had got into it, and they were very country people. And I dealt with them 100 times. And the husband had left. And back in that time, unless the wife or victim wanted to go get warrants, it wasn't the mandatory arrest like it is now. And so I showed up, he left, and the wife, she was, and these people look terrible. They were awful drug users too. And she was cooking fried chicken and it smelled good, the big cast iron chicken. And I said, "Vanessa, oh my God, that chicken smells good." And she said, "You want a piece?" And I said, "Yes, I'll take a piece." And she put it out on a paper towel, dripping with grease. And I'm standing on the porch eating a piece of chicken. And these other cops show up. And I was like, the husband's left. She doesn't want to go get warrants. And we start down the steps and they said, "I can't believe you're eating chicken from that house." And I said, "They're drug dealers, drug users, and a mess, but they're still regular people. And I'm going to tell you, eating that piece of chicken tickled that woman so much that when I would go back on other calls, she'd go, 'Jeff Pike's tried my chicken. He says it's really good.' And somebody's head would be bashed in or somebody's going to jail for some blood." She was more tickled over that. But those country people are like that. They remember, little silly things like that. And I told them, I was like, "What's the difference in eating that chicken from a KFC that you don't know who's cooking it behind the counter?"
So, yeah, the fried chicken, man. You got to try the fried
But
chicken.
there was a lot of little things like that that, maybe some big city cops would laugh at it. Now, of course, I work big city. I just think it was more of a, when they started all this community policing stuff and they wanted you to put up basketball goals or, put the trash cans. I never felt like that was community policing. I was like, community policing is getting out and walking into a business, and it's knowing who your neighborhood is or knowing the people, getting out of your car. To me, that was community policing, not what I consider these gimmicks. These gimmicks for publicity. Well, Officer Pike helped put in the basketball goal, or the big thing down here now is posing with food. Nobody poses with a big drug arrest anymore. They're posing with somebody brought donuts or pizzas to the police department. It's the feel good stuff. Same thing with community policing. I'm like, you should be community policing every day. And that's getting out of your car or stopping, or, especially in the rural areas. If I was patrolling around and I saw somebody out in the yard or somebody, whatever, I pulled in the driveway. Hey, I'm Officer Pike. Just checking on you guys. Is anything going on? Anything I need to be watching for? And people would be shocked. They're like, wow, we've never had a cop talk to us. We never had one slow, you see somebody, at the gate, with their tractor or whatever. Or, you go to these country stores and walk in and grab a water or soda and hang out for a little bit, and you find out what's going on, and not be a robot in a car that's just, it's just a guy in a car, and all you see is somebody riding by. You know who it is. You learn their personalities and you learn your community. To me, that was community policing. The other stuff that they would have us do, we'd have to do a project, and there was guys that were so proud they helped get trash cans put into somewhere, and there's nothing wrong with helping the community out, but I just felt like that you could do a lot more as a cop than those what I consider more gimmicky PR stunts.
When you talk about letting that person kiss their significant other in the back of the car, pulling up in the driveway, seeing how somebody's doing, or letting that person smoke that cigarette before you take them to jail, those all resonate with me, because or stopping in the store and shooting the breeze with people like that. Those are the big things. You do 16 years and law enforcement. You did you did a lot. You were wildlife game warden, patrol, narcotics, and at some point you want to start your own business, which is complete surveillance and investigative services. What made you walk into that different aspect of law enforcement?
Well, where I lived, I had a large piece of property. I was married at the time. Me traveling distances to work was becoming hard on my family. And then I had some connections in the insurance industry that kind of prompted me to look in that direction. And they were like, Jeff, we could use somebody in a rural area where you live at, that's got your kind of background. You could make a good living out of it. And so that's when I decided it would be, I could be my own boss, have my own business, financially do better, have it a little bit easier on my family, a lot of factors. So that's when I decided to start my company in 2000.
And it took a little while to build up, but now you're like full steam ahead right now, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, when I first started, I had clientele that was ready to use me. So I was pretty lucky. The only problem with that is if you have just one or two clients that are big, things can change and you can go from doing really well to struggling. But the nice thing was that my initial bigger clients carried me through until, 2-3 years passed. And then I start broadening my clientele to where it's at now, so I don't have just that one big client. I have a variety of insurance companies, a variety of law firms, My law firms do a variety of practices from personal injury to criminal defense. It's very diverse now, so that when one thing seems to be slow, something else picks up. My problem now is that if I get really busy, there are times that I have to turn work down because I can't do it all and I don't have anybody else. My company, I should have named it Jeff Pike Investigations, because the main thing that people hire me for is for me. And, I've had bigger jobs where I have sub work out, but I typically try to keep it manageable for just me, because a lot of it's very specific in that, when I work a homicide, they hire me because I've been qualified as an expert in homicide investigation or evidence collection or use of force or DUI or narcotics. And I'm not just saying I'm an expert, me saying it. That's a process. It's very hard to get because a lot of luck has to, you have to be hired for a job. You do the review, you make the recommendations. However, that case could be resolved by a financial settlement before you go to court or a plea bargain before you go to court. So it has to make it to court. Once you makes it to court, they have to decide they want to use me, and then they have to qualify me, which means my clients say, Jeff is great. And the other side says, I don't suck. I don't know anything. And then the judge makes that decision. And once the judge makes that decision, then you are a qualified expert. The more you get, the easier it becomes. However, it's taken me 24 years to amass, I get that opportunity like once every year or two, for it to make it all that way. So, I do lots of reviews of body cam footage or whatever, but it never makes it to the point where a judge can qualify me. So, and that's taken a long time. But that's what people on the criminal defense, that's why they're hiring me, is because I've got that background.
The expert witness part. So you can do expert witness testimony in 3 different states. Am I correct?
Well, I can do it anywhere in the U.S. I've been qualified in West Virginia, Tennessee, and Virginia. You
Okay.
can do it anywhere. It's just those are the places that's got it under my belt. And so for the people that's listening that may not know, once you're qualified as an expert, you can testify you can offer your opinion. I testify a lot every year as a fact witness. I took these photographs, I shot this video, I interviewed this person, or things of that nature, or I found this document, or I got this or that. But as an expert, you can offer opinion and say, well, Frank should have done this, or, this should have been done. This wasn't done. This is not a standard procedure, those kind of things.
So doing the private investigation, you've had some big cases that you've been involved in. One of them being the Austin Lee Edwards, the catfish caught.
Correct.
Can you explain to the audience how you got involved in that and and tell us about the investigation as much as you can?
Yeah, the interesting thing about that, I saw the news article, and what happened was a guy who was a deputy sheriff who he had just left the Virginia State Police, went to a deputy sheriff, became a deputy sheriff. And he went from Virginia, drove to Riverside, California, and he had been catfishing young girls. And this particular girl, he went with his gun and badge and got into the house under the pretext that he was there to conduct a online investigation. He murdered the mother, cut her throat. He suffocated and strangled the grandparents, and he kidnaps a 15-year-old girl, sets their house on fire when he leaves, gets in a pursuit with the cops, shoots it out with the cops. He ends up killing himself, and the girl survives. She was not injured physically. And when I saw the news article, my first social media post was, I bet the state police and the sheriff's office HR departments are working overtime, because I knew you do not do that. That is just not something you do the first go around. I knew this guy would have been having problems. And the fact that he left the state police to go to a sheriff's office that kind of, I was like, something's off here. So it was not that long after that, the LA Times, because it occurred there in California, they had two reporters that had came out here to Virginia, and I forget who they'd asked, and somebody said, Jeff, he works this area as a private investigator. He's a good source for information. And they contacted me to kind of help them kind of get the lay of the land and the who's who and whatnot. And so in a very short time, there became a rumor that this guy had some serious problems, and it may have been overlooked or covered up by the state police. And I was able to facilitate getting his polygraph exam, his pre-employment polygraph exam. And in that polygraph, he admitted to trying to kill his father, which he was committed mentally as a result of that. That's in his polygraph. He admits that. He admits cheating on tests when he was in college, some drug use. There was something else, not giving notice when he left an employer, which in my day was a big deal. And I believe there was some financial issues, but the main thing was that he'd been committed to a mental hospital. And as a result of that, your gun rights are revoked. So this guy cannot possess, buy, have a firearm, and he's hired by the state police and goes through the academy. And that spurred on the governor's office. Everybody was scrambling to, I don't know, make excuses as to why this has happened. And I somewhat would do news commentary about that, this was not a clerical error. When you do a polygraph, and I've had to take several polygraphs myself, you're doing it with an individual. That guy's role, once he does the polygraph, you've got a guy doing the background check. The polygraph guy should have told the background check, hey, look at this. Make sure you look at this. Nobody went to get the committal order, which I was able to get that through the court, showing that he was committed. And there was just all these huge, huge errors. And that's what we know of. You don't know what problems he may have been when he was working as a police officer, but, that's ongoing civil suit now and won't be, I think it's going to be set for May of 2027. But it was a guy that should never have been hired. And it was just the errors were so outrageous. And at the end of the day, nothing was done. Nobody loses their job. Nobody is held accountable. The state police, basically their excuse was somebody hit the wrong key on a data entry, which led to it. No, that's not correct. Somebody might have hit that in addition to the other stuff, but they did, that was a well thought out statement and a way out of it. And at the end of the day, nothing was done. And 3 people were dead. And this girl, can you imagine the trauma for a 15-year-old? So it'll be interesting to see civilly what happens. And the sheriff's office, in my opinion, hired him because he was certified. He was a trooper. We don't have to send him to the academy. And I'm not sure that they did much, if any, kind of check on him. So obviously, he made it through 2 police agencies with a mental health committal and his gun rights being revoked, and are currently revoked. We're currently revoked up until the time he killed himself.
That's utterly amazing how that just went unchecked.
And if I had not gotten the polygraph, everybody would say to this day, well, it's just the guy snapped. He never had a problem. There were no issues. He was, whatever. So, hopefully you would hope it would change some things, but I don't know it changed anything.
It's unbelievable. So another case you've been involved in is the Charles Givens case.
Sure. Charles Givens. Charles Gibbons was an inmate at one of our facilities and locally. And Charles, when he was like 3 or 4, fell down a set of steps and had a severe head injury. Now, Charles was not like, you see people get in trouble and they try to use their mental ability or capacity as excuses and whatnot. Somebody, well, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Good.
He's got the level of an 8th grader or something like that. Charles was severely cognitively, he was almost nonverbal. He had the mind of about a 5 or 6-year-old, and he lived with his mother, and the mother had a home health care nurse come in, and for whatever reason, Charles had never been violent in his whole life, and I think he was in his 40s when this happened. He murders the home health care nurse. And so they initially rule him mentally incompetent because obviously, there's something wrong with him. And then they redid it and ruled him mentally competent. And his attorney pled him guilty to first-degree murder, which is pretty much over the top. Probably should have been a second degree, but neither that, whatever. But he's put into this institution and he dies. And he had one sister that lived out of state, and the sister, about 3 weeks after her brother died, the warden had called her and said, your brother died of natural causes. And a couple, 3 weeks after that, she gets a call from a lady that says, "Hey, my boyfriend's an inmate. He saw what happened. Charles didn't die of natural causes. 5 guards beat him, and he died as a result of that." Well, the sister was somewhat skeptical, and the woman describes the beating. The girlfriend describes the beating to her. So she sends off for the autopsy, and the autopsy almost matches what this woman described to her as far as injuries. Well, then she gets back with them, and they go, "Oh, well, no, he fell. He fell." So she gets hold of some attorneys. The attorneys get hold of me, and we didn't know. I had to find the girlfriend, vet her as far as if she's legit. And then we had the inmate, state police come in, polygraph the inmate witness. He passes with flying colors. And basically, they took him into a shower, and he comes out with 4 broken ribs on the front, 4 broken ribs on the back, and a punctured spleen. And he's put in his cell. And we have video from inside the prison, and he bleeds to death in his cell. So for the longest time, all the guards were put on administrative leave with pay. Eventually, of the 5 guards, I think 2 retired and the others resigned. The feds were involved. There was never any criminal charges. Nobody was charged with anything. And then in the civil case, it was a jury trial, and the jury did not rule in favor of Charles Gibbons' family. They got hung up on, well, if his spleen was punctured, he should have died in the shower instead of his cell. It's a jury trial. You never know how they look at things. So that's what they decided. But interesting enough, in my investigation, I started seeing all these cases of people ended up in the hospital in critical condition with hypothermia. And I'm like, what is up with this? So as we interviewed people and different ones, what I found out was that, like, if you were making these guards mad, they would throw water on you and get you wet and put you in cells where they controlled the doors. And they would put you in a cell at night or in the wintertime wet and open the windows up, and they would freeze you to the point of critical condition hypothermia is a form of punishment. It was a lot of abuse there in that facility, not only to Mr. Gibbons, and I'm not forgiving what Gibbons did. It's terrible, but he was given a life sentence. He's there to serve his time. I don't want anybody living like the country club in prison by any means, but nobody deserves to be taken to the shower and beat and stomped as described by the inmate witness. and dying, or, people getting water thrown on them and tortured in that manner by freezing them. That's wrong, no matter what they're in prison for.
Was there any investigation into that institution since then? Has there been any changes?
No, not really. DOC, we have a new governor, and they've basically appointed the same people that were in that administrative line for Department of Corrections. The wardens got transferred. That's very routine. There's been some other prisons in Virginia. They just recently had another murder at, I think, Red Onion, which is a big prison. They typically, people are allowed to resign, retire, transfer. No real changes happen. And, with the quality of hiring with law enforcement, if you think that's bad, nobody wants to be a cop. Well, nobody wants to be a prison guard. That's just even worse.
So you've well, me and you before the podcast there, we talked about hiring standards and law enforcement. This kind of what you're talking about right now moves into that, into where when we came up in law enforcement, you explained it perfectly, getting how many applicants there were to get the job, and then where you were on the list, and, trying to make your way and get your foot in the door. And obviously now things have changed and the hiring standards are so much lower, and you've been vocal about that. What do you have to say about that? I mean, is there any change to that or no?
Yeah, I think you can change it. I think, you're going to have to figure out what attracts your, and I think a lot of departments are finding that out. The money is the amount of money that's being paid for startup or first time cops is like crazy money compared to, when you and I started. The benefits you'll see, you never saw the amount of marketing and advertising for police departments like I see now. Back in the day, there would be a little ad, governmental ad in the paper. The state police is hiring, or somebody's hiring, or it's mainly word of mouth. Now you see billboards, such and such is hiring, get a take home car, a 401k, $30,000 sign on bonus, all that kind of stuff. Just like with ICE, I knew some people that have left here, and their sign on bonus for those people, I think, was $40,000 or $50,000. You're going to be sent to who the hell knows where to work. But, I think the money and all that will help. However, I think in today's society, there's just so many people that they're not going to want to put up with the stigma of being a cop or what you have to deal with there. And, I don't know that you'll ever go back or be able to overcome that, no matter how much money you spend on it. I don't know any amount of money is going to change that. I think maybe society's got to the point, when I do these podcasts, there's always somebody in the comments that says, he's a cop, he's automatically crooked. I've had people ask me about different, being around large sums of money and narcotics. Did I ever, consider taking some of it? And I was like, no, it really never. In fact, was very protective of sometimes the cases and stuff I had, because I knew I was around other cops that would maybe try to sneak some of it out. And I'd worked around departments where people went to prison for doing that, but there's still people, he's lying, he's got to be, whatever. And I think society in general, you're not going to be able to change that. And some people aren't going to be able to handle that label to do the job. So what you get is you get people that are putting in for these jobs that are, in my opinion, don't have the right temperament. They're doing it for the wrong reasons. And, it tends to lead itself to.
Yeah, there's going to be, I think we're going to see, I think we're already seeing it. I know I've seen it. It's going to lead to more personnel complaints and more issues, just because people are doing it for the wrong reasons, or Is it the money grab or what have you? It's unfortunate that we're in these times. If you were to come across somebody that just is having that thought of entering law enforcement or has already just started their career, and what pieces of advice would you give them?
Gosh, I would say if they were looking to get into it, I would say, try to go to a bigger department. You don't have as much politics. When you go to work for these small towns or small sheriff's office, that's when you can get the cliques and the politics and all that. You don't have as much of that in a big city. However, in a bigger city, you're going to be more micromanaged. I think that would be my opinion. I would say do some ride alongs. I would say make sure you understand, this isn't like TV. It can be extremely exciting. It can be very rewarding, but there's a lot of paperwork and boredom and personalities. I think a lot of people don't get into the personality of the cop culture of, you'll go to work and there'll be some guys that hang with each other, some don't like each other, some don't like you. I've arrested a lot of people and there's cops that didn't like that. He's showing off. He's making me look bad. They're saying I need to do more or whatever. And I was the kind that I kept doing my job no matter what. So, there's so much that you need to think about. And then the public perception of police now, you're going to need to be able to live with that. If you're actually working, I always say, as long as you're trying to do the right thing, you'll never get in trouble. As long as you're doing things ethically, as long as you're treating people decent and not being an asshole, you won't go wrong. You need to watch yourself and be able to control things, but you don't need to be a robot asshole to do that. You can accomplish things. And then two, I think you need to be able to communicate well and work on your communication skills to where you can talk with anybody in society, whether they're the poorest of the poor or the richest of the rich. And a lot of this stuff, you can't teach it in the academy. You have to learn it by doing. And even with my background and being well ahead of the game, in my opinion, it was 3-4 years, I think, until I was really good at and comfortable. I could go to any call and knew what to do or knew how to handle it and didn't have to ask and didn't have to worry that I was making some huge mistake. And, and that stuff can't be taught.
Right. It's like I know for myself it was the few years of like trying to grasp this, and then finally I got to, like I realized, like, you got to come down to that person's level. I found that you have to come down, like you said, the white collar and the blue collar, and there's a society is so diverse. You have to recognize that situation you're in, and you have to go to that person's that level, right? You have to understand how to talk to them, work with them, and get a good feel for them, and you have to do that in seconds, right? You have to read that situation, you have to read that scene quickly in order to get there. And it took me a little while. I know it did. If you're going to come in all prim and proper, I don't think just be you. All right, Jeff. Well, I appreciate the time today. I know you're busy. I know you got a lot going on with your business, but I can't thank you enough for coming on the Blue Line Voice, Blood, Sand, and Smoke podcast and giving your time to me and the others that will be watching this. And as I already stated, that we're going to do another interview, but I'll make it a point to make the trip down to Virginia, and we'll get it done.
Sure. Look forward.
And maybe we can take a small trip to Bristol, and you can show me NASCAR country.
Sure. Sounds great.
Yeah. Just stay right there, Jeff. I'll be with you in a second, man.
Okay.